and welcome back to Adventures with Ariel. So, I was scrolling the Disney news pages the other day, as I usually do, and I came across this article right here. Now, this is a live-action remake that I can get on board with. Unlike many of the Disney remakes we see nowadays, this live-action Recess film will not be a soulless cash grab. Instead, it's a crowd-funded, fan-made project, and will bring the 3rd Street Elementary gang to life. Only this time around, they're in high school. So, as I was reading this article, something else popped into my mind. Something I haven't thought about for a really long time. One Saturday Morning. Seriously, in discussions or articles revolving around 90s nostalgia, no one ever talks about One Saturday Morning. But it was such a huge part of my childhood, and I'm willing to bet it was for many others as well. One Saturday Morning was the birthplace of classic 90s staples such as Recess, Pepper Ann, and Disney's Doug. Yeah, I much prefer the Nickelodeon version. Anyways, One Saturday Morning was a Saturday morning block that aired in the late 90s and early 2000s, and it was really the beginning of the end for Saturday morning cartoons. Let me explain. Saturday morning cartoons grew in popularity in the 1960s, when companies began to view cartoons as a way to advertise to kids watching TV on Saturday morning. This meant that a plethora of cereal and toy ads would fill the commercial breaks in between shows. The network saw an advertising goldmine, and for years it was. But protest groups would eventually call out the Saturday morning blocks for leaning too hard on commercialism and lacking an educational message. So a tug of war began between the networks and protest groups, and this eventually led to a mandate from the FCC that required all children's programming to feature at least 3 hours of educational content. The new regulations proved to be hard to navigate and severely limited the creative process, so networks began to cut animated blocks left and right, replacing them with live-action, teen-oriented shows that were more in line with the mandates. The fate of this decades-long childhood tradition was in jeopardy. But that would all change in 1997, when then Disney CEO Michael Eisner issued a request to the team at ABC. Create a Saturday morning cartoon block that is unique to all of its competitors. Around that same time, a man named Peter Hastings left Warner Brothers Animation in a heated dispute over the direction of 2 Warner Brothers shows he had written for, the much-beloved Animaniacs and Pinky and the Brain. Peter found solace at Disney, where he was given the very important job to overhaul the current ABC Saturday morning lineup. Hastings pitched an idea around the concept that Saturday is different from every other day of the week, and this would be represented by portraying the other weekdays as buildings. Throughout the block's intro, the other weekdays would be represented as gloomy buildings, but the building for Saturday would be a grand and colorful skyscraper. And according to the theme song, this building is a special one because it's where there's 5 hours of summer once a week. Ironically, most of the cartoons created for the block took place in a school. You know, because of that FCC regulation calling for educational programming. Apparently the writers thought, hey, if we set the show in a school, that makes it educational enough, right? Very clever, Disney. Oh, and apparently that's also the reason you would always see this throughout the block.
Illuminating television.
It's supposed to mean that the content is educational. I mean, I never knew that, but yeah, that's why it's there. So, One Saturday Morning was not only the name of the block, but also a 2-hour live-action hosting show. The name came from the address of the giant skyscraper I was telling y'all about earlier. The interior of the building was portrayed through the use of virtual sets, a technology that was in its infancy at the time. It utilized 3D animation and effects that are inserted into the program in real time. The skyscraper was also home to hosting segments that would take place throughout the show. The block's first season was hosted by now New York City-based lawyer Jessica Purnell, and later by Valerie Ray Miller in 1998. The segments also featured an elephant sidekick named Jelly Roll, voiced by Everybody Loves Raymond actor Brad Garrett. And of course, the school-based TV shows weren't quite enough to meet the FCC's educational requirement, so there were also educational features intertwined with the rest of the content. These included Manny the Uncanny, in which the title character would visit an unusual job site and observe how the job job is performed, Great Minds Think for Themselves, which featured short animated history lessons given by Aladdin's genie, and How Things Work, a 1950s comic book styled segment explaining feats of American engineering. But the one segment that really stuck out to me was Mrs. Munger's class, in which a page from an actual elementary school yearbook had its faces animated for humorous effect. Fun fact! The actual people whose photos were featured never granted their permission for their likeliness to be used. They took legal action against the producers, and this resulted in the eventual removal of the sketch. One Saturday Morning quickly became a very popular television block, and this was largely due to the clever writing behind the animated series it aired. Amongst the original lineup was Pepper Ann, featuring work by Tom Warburton, the future creator of Cartoon Network's codename Kids Next Door. And then there was Recess, created by Paul Germain and John Ancelifabahit. I can't pronounce this. They had just come off working on these 90s classics. But then there was the somewhat controversial Disney's brand spanking new Doug. Yep, that was actually the full name of the show. Doug, of course, originally started on Nickelodeon, with its initial run ending in 1994. But in 1996, Jumbo Pictures was purchased by Walt Disney Pictures, thus making Doug an official Disney property. So Disney started making new Doug episodes for One Saturday Morning. And although many people were against the idea of the new Doug and all the changes that came with it, Disney's Doug was still the most popular show of the block and spawned tons of merchandise, video games, a musical show at MGM Studios, and a feature film titled Doug's First Movie. And it would also be Doug's last movie. The film did well at the box office, but bombed with critics. And this wasn't the only One Saturday Morning show that was turned into a film. The early 2000s would also see the release of the far superior Recess, School's Out, and Teacher's Pet. As the years passed, more shows would be introduced to the lineup, including ones based off of popular Disney movies like Hercules, Tarzan, Jungle Cubs, 101 Dalmatians, and Buzz Lightyear of Star Command. There was also House of Mouse, the most epic Disney crossover that you could possibly dream of. Well, aside from Kingdom Hearts. And who could forget shows like Lloyd in Space, Sabrina the Animated Series, and The Weekenders. Actually, I think a lot of people forgot about them. Don't get me wrong, I remember them being huge hits at the time, but no one seems to talk about them anymore. Let me know in the comments if you remember any of these, because they were a huge part of my childhood. Sadly, all good things must come to an end. After a 5-year run, One Saturday Morning would air its final broadcast on September 7th, 2002. It was then replaced by ABC Kids, which started off fairly strong, but eventually became the place for Disney Channel reruns and Power Rangers reruns. ABC Kids eventually got the axe in 2011 when Disney decided to move its kid shows exclusively to its then numerous cable networks. The block was then replaced with a series of live-action educational programming run by Litton Entertainment instead of Disney. In a world of streaming services, Cartoon Network, Disney Channel, Disney XD, and PBS Kids, there would be no reason for Saturday morning cartoons to still exist today. But I'm thankful that I got to be part of the last generation to enjoy them. Growing up in the 90s and early 2000s, One Saturday Morning was a ritual every weekend. And oh, what a glorious ritual it was. Thank you, One Saturday Morning, for giving an entire generation a reason to not sleep in on the weekend. So I hope y'all enjoyed this walk down memory lane. I know I did. If you like this video, I highly recommend you check out my History of Disney Channel series. I cover every decade in Disney Channel history from the 1980s to today, so definitely check that out. And definitely comment down below and tell me what your favorite shows or movies were that came out of One Saturday Morning. As I stated before, I was a huge fan of Recess, pretty much saw every episode of that show and watched the spin-off movie religiously. And of course, am so excited for the live action adaptation. Also, if you learned something new today, please give this video a huge thumbs up, as well as hit that subscribe button down below for new Disney content every single week. Alright y'all, thank you so much for watching, and as always, have a magical day.